Our correspondent Chris Moore has been following the story for us throughout. He joins us now in the studio. So, Chris, I gave a very brief summary there, but tell us in a bit more detail how we got here.
Less brief summary.
Exactly, yeah.
Stuart. Obviously, there's a lot going on at once. You were talking there about the protests this weekend. Two people who were caricatured there, normally not in a particularly flattering light, were the head of Paris police, Didier Lallement. Now, he was a man appointed at the height of the Gilets jaunes, yellow vest protest crisis, a man who makes no secret of his kind of, tough line, uncompromising methods. Another figure, you saw a photo of him just now, we can hopefully flash that back up again, Gérald Darmanin, he's the French Interior Minister, a role that's often kind of caricatured as France's top cop. He comes from the French political right before hooking up with Emmanuel Macron's centrist movement. And perhaps in the wake of a bit of bad blood between the police and previous interior ministers, appointed as somebody who had the ear of the cops, really. Before we get on to the rest of the issue, French police, and particularly French police unions, who are very powerful, had long been complaining that, well, certain members of the public might not feel safe, but we don't feel safe either. Our officers have been singled out on the internet, on social media, and threatened, and there are instances of that happening. Fast forward a little bit, therefore, and what do we get? We get the government's global security bill and that controversial Article 24 that you were talking about, something that raised alarm bells at the UN, in Europe, and even from France's own human rights watchdog. Obviously, you can see it quoted there, and intent to harm the officer's physical or mental integrity by filming and posting images. That was going to be made a criminal offence. With many legal matters, intent is the key word there, and obviously many people fearful that it would be the police who would decide on that. Images that had been filmed and would not end up seeing the light of day, that the police would act with impunity. If we needed a case in point, we then got two, or perhaps more. First of all, there was the chaotic evacuation of a migrant camp from the Place de la République in central Paris, during which images were shot of violence towards migrants and journalists. Again, the power of the image, shot precisely because journalists and members of the public were there to film all of that. And then, as you said, those images which shocked France and caused a lot of shock further afield, I think, of that black music producer, Michel, being beaten up by French police in his studio here in Paris. 4 officers now charged over that. Some people are saying that those particular images, if they were CCTV, wouldn't have come under the scope of Article 24, but the fact of the matter is that scope is potentially so wide that that's where the concern comes from. Then demonstrations, and lo and behold, images filmed by journalists and others of violence going in both directions, directed against police in some cases. And I think to take the sting out of it, as you said, Article 24 has been withdrawn for now, at least.
It's totally ballooned, though, this, hasn't it, Chris?
Absolutely,
I mean, it's turned into a massive
extraordinary
debate about
sequence of
the
events.
power of images that we could really see in those pictures you're showing us. Freedom of the press, also the government kind of caught in the middle of all
this.
Yeah,
that's right, yeah. And, well, first of all, we don't know where things are going to go in Parliament. It's been withdrawn for now. It will be rewritten. We don't know what form it may end up taking. Many of its detractors say that the whole law needs to go, at least various bits of it involving drones, etc. There's another bill going through which is part of Macron's clampdown on Islamist separatism, as he calls it, and concerns there being raised over Article 25, not 24 of that bill. There's a couple of months to go as far as all of that is concerned, going through Parliament. Talking there about Darmanin and Lallement, regardless of the politics and personnel, the reality of the situation is that French police have, for several years, been called out by rights groups and by the likes of the UN and the EU. And it tends to come down to their behaviour. First of all, protests. We have to remember, I mean, nobody's pretending that the Gilets jaunes protesters were uniformly peaceful, but the fact of the matter is that people died and were mutilated during those protests. Some of the weapons involved have now been banned. And then, of course, there are the Michel instance, sadly, is not a solitary one. There have been various cases over the years of police using or allegedly using excessive force. It does tend to come down to sometimes their interaction with people of colour, with minority communities, particularly in the Paris suburbs. That Michel case, as I said, is not an isolated one. Obviously, the there are several French police forces. It's not just one. It's reforming it is very difficult. But there is perhaps this sense of impunity and the idea that we've never got really round to addressing institutional problems, institutional racism. It's always a question of saying not all the police are bad. Reforms will happen, but there's never been a kind of global reform, if you like.
So how on earth do you go about reforming the police?
Well, there was, as I said, there's the idea of the culture of the police there. That, whether or not there is an institutional reform coming forward, is very, very debatable. But there are several sort of specific examples of things which have been suggested. For example, first of all, equipping the police themselves with cameras, something which has been done in other countries if they're working as they should and when they should. That could potentially take a lot of a sting out of certain situations. That's something which the Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, has said will be operational by July next year. There's also the issue of training. Again, that's something which the French government actually admits. Perhaps too many officers rush through inadequate training problems, particularly at a time when they're making a lot of recruitments. One thing which has been singled out, particularly in terms of what goes on in the Paris suburbs, is you often get young, inexperienced officers who've just gone through that training programme being put straight into some of the toughest areas to police, and obviously the potential for things to go wrong there. Another thing which all of this has brought up is France's police watchdog. In many countries, you would hear the word independent. Before that, not the case here. It is specialist officers investigating the police investigating the police, in effect. It's not that it hasn't brought about convictions. Many officers have been found guilty and received punishment as a result of this, but it is that perception of this culture of impunity that's a problem. It should be pointed out that throughout all of this, police, the confidence of the French public in the police remains relatively high. It was sky high in the wake of the terror attacks back in 2015. It's gone down a little bit since then, but it's well over 50% still are basically behind the police. But obviously, the more incidents there are like these, the more shocking images there are. That's only likely to perhaps exacerbate these problems and that perception of impunity.
Chris, thanks so much. Chris Moore, who's been following that story for us here on France 24. No doubt a lot more on that story as well here on France 24 to come.